The crystal chandeliers of Lumière cast prismatic light across tables, where fortunes changed hands over courses that cost more than most people's monthly rent. 3 Michelin stars hung in metaphorical air above every white-clothed surface, every silver dome, every sommelier's practiced pour. Maya Chen moved through this world like water through stone, present but unnoticed, essential but invisible. At 26, she had mastered the art of disappearing in plain sight, her black uniform and pulled-back hair designed to make her forgettable. The wealthy didn't want to see their servers. They wanted their glasses filled by ghosts. She had learned the geometry of invisibility, eyes lowered at precisely the right angle, movement smooth enough to avoid drawing attention, but efficient enough to avoid seeming slow. Never speak first. Never make eye contact longer than necessary. Never, under any circumstances, let them see you thinking. Because if they saw you thinking, they might realize you were human, and humans complicated things. Tonight she was assigned to the Monarch Room, a private dining space reserved for transactions that required absolute discretion. The kind of room where NDAs were signed before appetizers and billion-dollar deals closed before dessert. Maya paused at the service station, arranging water glasses on her tray with practiced precision, her reflection caught in the polished silver. Tired eyes, the faint shadows beneath them, testament to the double shifts she'd been pulling for months. The hospital bills didn't care that she was exhausted. The collectors didn't care that her mother's chemotherapy had nearly bankrupted them before the cancer finally retreated into remission. They only cared about the $187,000 that remained, a number that grew with interest while Maya's hope shrank. She touched the small pendant hidden beneath her collar, her father's, from before the accident that had taken him when she was 14. He'd been deaf since birth, and Maya had grown up speaking 2 languages, English and American Sign Language. Her hands had learned to dance before they learned to write. She still remembered the way he would wake her on Sunday mornings, his hands spelling out breakfast menus in the golden light that streamed through their queen's apartment window. Pancakes or waffles, he would sign, his face bright with the simple joy of being her father. French toast was always his suggestion, and Maya would pretend to consider other options before choosing it, because she loved the way his smile widened when she did. Those hands had taught her everything, not just language, but attention, how to read the subtle shifts in a person's posture, the micro-expressions that flickered across faces like weather across a landscape. The world speaks in whispers, he would sign. Most people are too loud to hear them. After his death, she'd thrown herself into linguistics at Columbia, graduating summa cum laude with a master's degree in applied linguistics and a specialization in nonverbal communication systems. Her thesis on cross-cultural gesture interpretation had been published in 3 academic journals. She'd been offered a position at the UN's interpreter division. Then her mother got sick. The UN position required relocation to Geneva. Her mother needed her here. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Maya had declined the offer, picked up a serving tray, and begun the slow process of watching her dreams dissolve into sparkling water, refills, and wine pairings. Maya, the head server, Francois, appeared at her elbow. His French accent was as cultivated as his disdain. The Monarch Room, 8:30 seating, the Harrington party. Maya's hands stilled on the glasses. The Harringtons. Even she knew that name. Marcus Harrington, founder of Harrington Capital, one of the most powerful private equity firms in the world. His acquisition targets became empires. His rejections became obituaries. Maya. How many in the party? Francois, 6, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, their legal counsel, and 3 representatives from some tech company. Apparently it's an acquisition dinner. $50 million deal. He said it casually, the way one might mention the weather. In this restaurant, $50 million was Tuesday. Francois, Contidi. Be invisible, be perfect, and for God's sake, don't speak unless spoken to. Maya nodded, lifting her tray. She'd perfected invisibility years ago. It was the only skill she had left that anyone seemed to value. The Monarch Room waited behind mahogany doors, a sanctuary of burgundy velvet and old money aesthetics. A Monet hung on the north wall, a real one, casually displayed as if $30 million in brushstrokes were merely decoration. The table was set for 6, each place setting a symphony of crystal and porcelain that cost more than Maya made in a month. She began her preparations, checking wine temperatures, adjusting candle positions, ensuring every knife edge aligned with mathematical precision. This was her art now. Not the linguistics papers she'd once written, not the translation work she'd dreamed of, but the geometry of silverware. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could read gestures in 12 cultural contexts, could interpret the subtle hand movements of diplomats negotiating peace treaties, could decode the silent language of lovers and liars alike. But here, she was paid to read nothing, to see nothing, hear nothing, be nothing. Just a ghost in a black uniform, waiting for the powerful to arrive. They arrived like a weather system, pressure changing before Maya even saw them, the air in the room somehow heavier with the weight of their presence. Marcus Harrington entered first. 63 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of handsome that came from generations of good breeding and better nutrition. His suit probably cost more than Maya's annual salary, but he wore it. Carelessly, the way only the truly wealthy could. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had never been told no, or, if he had simply purchased a yes. Behind him came Victoria Harrington, and Maya felt her breath catch slightly. Victoria was beautiful in the way of museum sculptures, cold, perfect, and designed to be admired from a distance. Mid-40s, blonde hair swept into an architectural updo, wearing a dress that whispered haute couture with every movement. Diamonds dripped from her ears and throat, catching the candlelight like frozen tears. There was something calculated about her beauty, Maya noticed. Every detail had been considered, curated, weaponized. The precise shade of lipstick that made her appear approachable while maintaining distance. The earrings that drew attention to her swan-like neck. The posture that said, "I belong here in ways you never will." Maya had seen women like Victoria before, not often, but enough to recognize the type. Women who had turned themselves into investments, who understood that, in certain circles, beauty was currency and charm was compound interest. They were survivors in their own way, though they would never admit to surviving anything. But it was Victoria's hands that caught Maya's attention. They moved constantly, small gestures, quick flicks of fingers that most people would dismiss as nervous habit, but Maya's trained eye recognized the patterns instantly. Victoria Harrington was signing, not full sentences, just fragments, shorthand, and she was signing to someone. Maya's gaze shifted to the man entering behind Victoria, tall, dark-haired, sharp-featured. He was introduced as Derek Sullivan, a consultant attached to the tech company being acquired. But the way Victoria's eyes flicked to him, the way his fingers twitched in response to hers, these two shared a language they thought no one else could read. The remaining guests filtered in. Richard Chen, Harrington Capital's chief, legal counsel, a compact man with suspicious eyes who seemed to evaluate everyone as a potential liability. Then the three representatives from NextGen AI, the acquisition target, two nervous engineers, and their CEO, a young man named Thomas Wright, who looked like he was about to sell his firstborn and wasn't sure he'd negotiated a fair price. Maya stepped forward with the water pitcher, beginning her silent rounds. "Marcus, gentlemen, welcome to what I hope will be a productive evening. Thomas, your technology is impressive. The due diligence has been illuminating." Thomas Wright nodded eagerly, clearly nervous. "Mr. Harrington, I can assure you that everything in our documentation is—" Victoria, cutting him off. "Darling, perhaps we could order first? I'm famished." Her tone was silk over steel. Thomas wilted slightly. Maya moved to Victoria's side, offering the menu. Victoria didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. To Victoria Harrington, Maya was furniture, a mechanism that delivered food and removed plates, no more worthy of attention than the chair she sat on. But Maya saw Victoria's hands move beneath the table, quick and dismissive. She was signing to Derek across the table, and Maya's blood went cold as she translated the gesture without thinking. "Pathetic girl. Look at her uniform. Probably makes less in a year than my shoes cost." Derek's response was subtle, a shift of fingers, a slight turn of wrist. But Maya read it clearly. "Focus. Is the old fool suspicious?" Maya's hand trembled slightly on the water pitcher. She forced herself to remain still, to maintain the mask of pleasant blankness that was her professional armor. But inside, her mind was racing. Victoria's fingers moved again, hidden beneath the tablecloth. No, he trusts the documentation completely. Richard found nothing. Maya set the water pitcher down and retreated to the service station, her heart pounding. She was trained to observe, to interpret, to understand the unspoken. And what she'd just witnessed was unmistakable. The billionaire's wife and the consultant were communicating in secret, discussing Marcus Harrington's suspicions, or lack thereof, about documentation. This wasn't a casual affair. This was conspiracy. Maya's mind raced through the possibilities. An affair would have been unremarkable. The wealthy cheated with the same casual entitlement they brought to everything else. But this was different. This was business. This was deliberate. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged clean glasses on her tray. She had spent 3 years learning to see nothing, hear nothing, know nothing. Invisibility wasn't just a skill. It was a survival mechanism. The wealthy didn't punish servants who made mistakes. They simply erased them, the way one might throw away a pen that had stopped working. But she couldn't unsee what she had seen. And as the evening continued, she found herself watching Victoria's hands with the same intensity she had once brought to analyzing diplomatic transcripts. The dinner progressed with the precision of a military operation. Courses appeared and disappeared, wine flowed, and the conversation circled the acquisition like sharks around a lifeboat. Maya served silently, but now her attention was laser-focused on the hidden dialogue playing out beneath the surface. Marcus, to Thomas, your AI patent portfolio is what interests us most. The natural language processing algorithms are unique. Thomas Dr. Sullivan has been instrumental in developing those systems. His background in computational linguistics. Derek, smoothly. The patents are sound. I've personally verified the research lineage. Everything traces back to original work conducted at NextGen. But beneath the table, Victoria's hands told a different story. Maya caught fragments as she cleared the appetizer plates. Tonight, the signing, then we disappear. Derek's response came in account ready. 30 million transferred on closing. Maya nearly dropped the plates. 30 million came in accounts, a signing tonight. Whatever was happening, it was about to happen fast, and it was going to cost Marcus Harrington far more than money. Maya's mind worked like a translation algorithm, processing information at speeds that would have made her Columbia professors proud. She began cataloging every sign, every gesture, building a picture of the conspiracy unfolding before her eyes. Her training had prepared her for exactly this kind of work, not serving food, but serving truth. At Columbia, she had studied how people communicated when they thought they were being secret, the tilted heads of lovers hiding their relationship, the careful distances maintained by spies exchanging information, the micro-gestures of business partners planning betrayals. Victoria and Derek were textbook. They thought their sign language was a private channel, a frequency no one else could access, but Maya could read them as easily as printed text. Between courses, she observed. During wine pours, she interpreted. And slowly, the pieces began to fit together into something monstrous. Derek Sullivan wasn't just a consultant. He was the architect. Through Victoria's signed fragments, Maya learned that he had fabricated portions of NextGen's patent portfolio. The original research he claimed to have verified was stolen, plagiarized from a small Chinese AI lab that had gone bankrupt 3 years ago. The patents Marcus was about to acquire were worthless, built on intellectual property theft that would unravel the moment anyone dug deep enough. But no one would dig, because Derek had buried the evidence, and Victoria had ensured Marcus never looked too closely. The plan was elegant in its cruelty. Marcus would pay $50 million for patents that would be challenged and invalidated within months. The company would collapse, and Derek, with Victoria's help, would vanish with $30 million skimmed from the transaction through a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts that Derek had set up. Victoria Harrington was stealing from her own husband, and she was using the one language she thought no one around them would understand to coordinate the theft. Maya retreated to the service station, her hands shaking. She pressed them against the cool stainless steel counter, forcing herself to think. What was she supposed to do with this knowledge? Who would believe her? A waitress claiming to have overheard a billionaire's wife plotting fraud, through sign language no less? They would laugh her out of the room. They would assume she was confused or crazy, or trying to create a scandal for money. Victoria Harrington had power, position, expensive lawyers. Maya had a rented uniform and a mountain of debt. But she also had truth. And she had proof, because Derek had made a mistake. In his arrogance, in his certainty that no one could understand. Their silent communication, he had signed a name. The name of the Chinese lab whose research they had stolen. Zheng Technologies. Beijing. Maya knew that name. She had read a paper from their computational linguistics division during her graduate research. The paper had outlined a revolutionary approach to natural language processing, the exact approach that NextGen was now claiming as their own patented innovation. The moment crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. She wasn't just a witness to fraud. She was the only person in this room who could prove it. She returned to the table as coffee was being served. Marcus was reviewing documents that Richard had spread across a cleared section of the table. The acquisition agreements, ready for signatures. $50 million represented in neat stacks of paper and blue ink pens. Marcus, scanning documents. Everything appears to be in order. Thomas, I believe we're ready to make this official. Thomas Wright's hand trembled as he reached for the pen. He didn't know. Maya was suddenly certain of it. Thomas was a puppet, not a partner in this scheme. He had built something real, and Derek had corrupted it without his knowledge, layering stolen patents over legitimate work until the foundation was rotten. Victoria's hands moved beneath the table, urgent now. Sign, now, before anything changes. Derek's response, 30 seconds, then we're done. Maya watched Marcus lift his pen. In moments, the signature would be complete. $50 million would transfer, and Victoria and Derek would begin their disappearing act, leaving behind a destroyed company and a husband who had trusted the wrong person. The weight of decision pressed against Maya's chest. She could stay silent, stay invisible, keep her job, keep her head down, keep paying off her mother's medical bills one water refill at a time. No one would ever know what she had seen. No one would blame her for a theft she didn't commit. She thought of her mother sleeping peacefully in their small apartment, unaware that her daughter stood at the edge of a decision that could change everything. The remission was fragile. The bills were crushing. Maya couldn't afford to lose this job. Literally couldn't afford it in the most concrete sense possible. But she thought of her father, of his hands moving in the language they had shared, teaching her that communication was sacred, that words, whether spoken or signed, carried weight and responsibility. He had taught her that understanding came with obligation, that seeing meant speaking. Truth doesn't care about convenience, he had signed to her once, after a difficult conversation with a doctor who had tried to oversimplify his condition for Maya's benefit. It exists whether we acknowledge it or not. The only choice we have is whether to be the one who speaks it. Maya set down her coffee tray and stepped out of the shadows. Maya, Mr. Harrington, I would not sign those. Would. Documents. The room went silent. Every head turned toward her. The invisible waitress who had dared to speak. Marcus's pen hovered over the signature line, frozen in midair. Victoria, sharp, incredulous. Excuse me? Francois, rushing forward. I am so sorry, Mr. Harrington. This girl is clearly... Maya, return to the kitchen immediately. But Maya didn't move. She stood her ground, her eyes fixed on Marcus Harrington's face. Maya, the natural language processing patents in that acquisition are stolen. They were developed by Zheng Technologies in Beijing before the company went bankrupt in 2021. NextGen's patent applications are built on plagiarized research. If you sign those papers, you'll be acquiring worthless intellectual property and exposing Harrington Capital to catastrophic legal liability. Silence. Complete, crystalline silence. The room seemed to contract around Maya's words. She could feel every eye on her. Francois's horror, Richard's sharp attention, Thomas's confusion. But she kept her focus on Marcus, watching his expression shift from irritation to something more complex. The first flicker of doubt. She knew what she looked like to them. A waitress, a servant, someone who had no business understanding patent law or corporate fraud or international intellectual property disputes. Someone who should be invisible. But she was done being invisible. Then Victoria Harrington laughed, a sharp, brittle sound designed to wound. Victoria. This is absurd. Marcus, are you going to let a waitress derail a $50 million transaction with conspiracy theories? Call security. Derek, too quickly. She's clearly disturbed. I don't know where she's getting this nonsense, but I personally verified every patent in that portfolio. Maya. Did you verify them the same way you verified the Cayman Islands account where you plan to transfer $30 million after the signing tonight? Derek's face went white. Victoria's composure cracked, just for an instant. But in that instant, Maya saw everything. Fear, rage, the realization that their perfect plan had just been shattered by a ghost they had never bothered to see. Marcus, slowly lowering his pen, how do you know about a Cayman account? Victoria, signing frantically to Derek beneath the table. She's bluffing, she can't possibly... Maya, her own hands moving in perfect ASL as she speaks. I can understand every word you're signing, Mrs. Harrington. Every word you've signed all evening. Victoria's hands froze mid-gesture. Her face contorted into an expression Maya had never seen on a human being. A mixture of shock, horror, and something close to animal terror. Maya, Contidi, signing and speaking simultaneously. You said, and I quote, "The old fool trusts the documentation completely." You told Mr. Sullivan that 30 million would be transferred to the Cayman account on closing. You discussed disappearing together once the deal was signed. Maya's hands moved with the fluid. Grace of someone who had spoken this language since childhood. Every gesture was precise, elegant, damning. She was no longer a waitress. She was a translator, rendering Victoria's secret language visible to everyone in the room. Richard, the lawyer, standing abruptly. Mr. Harrington, I recommend we halt this proceeding immediately. Victoria, desperate. This is ridiculous. She's making it up. How would a waitress know sign language? My father was deaf, Mrs. Harrington. I learned ASL before I learned to read. I hold a master's degree in applied linguistics from Columbia University, with a specialization in nonverbal communication systems. I have read every published paper on natural language processing in the last decade, including the seminal work from Jung Technologies that your partner plagiarized to build NextGen's patent portfolio. She turned to Derek, whose face had gone the color of old paper. Maya, Con TD. You stole Dr. Wei Chen's recursive parsing algorithm and filed it as original research in 2022. You took Jung's neural architecture designs and rebranded them as NextGen innovations. The patents are worthless because they're not yours, and any competent intellectual property review will prove it. Derek, standing, backing toward the door. I don't have to listen to this. Victoria, let's... Marcus, his voice quiet, cold as Arctic wind. Sit down. It was not a request. Derek froze, caught between the door and the force of Marcus Harrington's fury. Marcus, Con TD, to Richard. Call security. And get my forensic accountants on the phone. I want every transaction Derek Sullivan has ever been associated with traced within the hour. He turned to Victoria, and Maya saw something shift in his eyes. Not rage. That would come later. This was something worse. This was the moment a man realized the woman he had trusted with his name, his home, his heart, had been plotting his destruction. Marcus Contied, to Victoria. $30 million. That was your price. Our marriage, our life, everything we built for $30 million. Victoria, her mask finally shattering. You never built anything, Marcus. I stood beside you for 20 years while you built your empire. I hosted your dinners. I charmed your investors. I was your trophy, your accessory, your silent partner. And I never saw a dime that wasn't an allowance. Her voice had risen to a shriek. The polished society wife was gone, replaced by something raw and wounded and vicious. Maya watched the transformation with clinical fascination. This was what she had studied, the moment when masks shattered, when the carefully constructed persona fell away and the truth emerged. Victoria's face twisted through a dozen emotions in seconds: rage, fear, self-pity, and beneath it all, a desperate animal need to survive. Victoria, Contady. I deserved that money. I earned it. And Derek was going to give me the life you never did. Maya, quietly but with iron underneath, misses. Harrington, your husband's forensic accountants will find everything. The shell companies, the offshore transfers, the falsified research. You had your chance to be a partner. You chose to be a thief. Victoria turned on Maya with fury blazing in her eyes. Victoria, who do you think you are? You're a servant, a nobody. You pour water for a living. Maya, I'm the nobody who just saved your husband $50 million. And I'm the nobody who understands that what we do for a living doesn't define who we are, but what we do when no one's watching does. She looked at Victoria with something that wasn't quite pity, but contained it. Maya, Contady. You thought you were invisible when you signed to him. You thought no one could see you, but I see invisible security arrived with the quiet efficiency of people who dealt with wealthy disasters regularly. Derek Sullivan was escorted out first, his protests dying as Richard recited a list of potential charges that would follow him for the rest of his life. Fraud, intellectual property theft, wire fraud, conspiracy. The words hung in the air like a judgment. Maya watched Derek's face as Richard continued his recitation. The man who had seemed so polished, so confident, had crumbled like wet paper. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape that didn't exist. In the end, he went quietly, not with dignity, but with the hollow compliance of someone who had finally run out of lies. Victoria's exit was quieter, but somehow more devastating. She gathered her dignity around her like a cloak, but it couldn't hide the truth that everyone in the room now knew. As she passed Maya, she paused. Victoria, signing, her movements sharp with hatred. You've ruined everything. Maya, signing back calm. You ruined yourself. I just translated. Victoria flinched as if struck, then swept out of the room with security flanking her. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gavel falling. Thomas Wright stood. In the corner, his face ashen. He had come here believing he was selling his life's work to a legendary investor. Instead, he had learned that his company had been corrupted from within, its foundation poisoned by stolen research he had never known existed. Thomas, to Maya. I didn't know. The patents, Derek handled all the documentation. I had no idea he had. Maya, gently. I believe you. The core research, the work you actually did, that's still real. It's the foundation that was false. That can be fixed. Thomas nodded, but his eyes were hollow. He had come so close to selling something that would have destroyed him, and he would never have known until it was too late. The room slowly emptied. Richard was on his phone, already coordinating with attorneys and investigators. The next-gen engineers had retreated to a corner, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Francois had disappeared entirely, presumably to explain to the restaurant's management why the most exclusive private dining room in Manhattan had just become a crime scene, and Maya stood alone by the service station, wondering if she still had a job. Marcus Yu. Maya turned. Marcus Harrington stood alone in the center of the room, the abandoned documents scattered on the table behind him, like fallen leaves. The cold confidence she had seen earlier was gone. In its place was something rawer, a man stripped of certainty, trying to rebuild from the rubble of the evening. Marcus, Con TD. Who are you? Really? Maya straightened her spine. She was still wearing the black uniform, still standing in the servants' corner of the room. But something had shifted. She no longer felt invisible. Maya. My name is Maya Chen. I have a master's in applied linguistics from Columbia. I specialize in nonverbal communication systems, cross-cultural gesture interpretation, and I was offered a position at the UN's interpreter division 3 years ago. I turned it down. Marcus, incredulous. You turned down the UN to pour water at a Manhattan restaurant? Maya. The position required relocation to Geneva. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer the same week. She needed me here. She said it simply, without self-pity. Facts were facts. She had learned long ago that explaining her circumstances was not the same as asking for sympathy. People like Marcus Harrington didn't respond to sympathy. They responded to strength. Maya Con TD. She's in remission now, 18 months and counting. But the medical bills, 3 years of treatment, surgeries, hospitalizations, insurance covered some of it, but some of it became mine. She thought of the spreadsheet on her phone, the one she updated every week with payments and interest calculations, the number that never seemed to shrink no matter how many double shifts she worked. Maya Con TD. She's in remission now, but the medical bills, I work here because it pays better than adjunct teaching. I owe $187,000 in medical debt. This job was supposed to help me pay it off. Marcus, sitting heavily in the nearest chair, you gave up everything for your mother. Maya, I gave up a job. She's my mother. That's not a sacrifice. It's just what you do. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring at the scattered documents on the table. When he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more human. Marcus, you know, I built Harrington Capital from nothing. I started with a $50,000 loan and a willingness to work 20-hour days. I always believed I could read people, that I understood who to trust and who to avoid. I built my entire empire on that belief. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Marcus Con TD. And tonight, my wife, was plotting to steal from me. A consultant I hired personally was helping her, and the only person in this room who saw the truth was a woman I didn't even bother to notice. He looked at Maya with something she hadn't expected, genuine respect. Marcus Con T. How did you know about Zheng Technologies, the Chinese lab? Maya. I read their papers during my graduate research. Dr. Wei Chen's work on recursive parsing was brilliant. Revolutionary, really. When Derek signed the name to your wife, I recognized it immediately. And I knew that their research timeline predated NextGen's patent filings by at least 2 years. Marcus, you're telling me that because you read academic papers 3 years ago, you were able to identify a $50 million fraud in real time? Maya, with a small smile. Knowledge has a way of becoming useful when you least expect it. Marcus Harrington stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline glittering in the darkness. When he turned back to Maya, his expression had changed. The shell-shocked executive was gone. In his place was the legendary dealmaker who had built an empire. Marcus. I'm going to need a new due diligence team, one that can read the things people don't want me to see, cultural signals, linguistic patterns, the hidden communications that slip past traditional analysis. Maya, uncertain. Mr. Harrington. Marcus, I want you to build it. A new division at Harrington Capital, cross-cultural intelligence assessment. You'd have complete authority to design the methodology, hire your own team, set your own protocols. Maya stared at him, not quite processing the words. Marcus, Con TD, starting salary of $750,000, plus performance bonuses tied to successful fraud prevention. Full benefits, obviously, and... He paused, his eyes meeting hers with something that looked almost like understanding. Marcus, Con TD, your medical debt, the $187,000. Consider it paid, tonight. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She thought of her mother, of the bills that had been choking them for years, of the double shifts and the exhaustion and the dreams she had surrendered to keep them both afloat. $187,000, gone, just like that, with a single sentence from a man who had that much money in a checking account he probably forgot existed. The number that had defined her life for 3 years, erased. She felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes and forced them back. Not here, not now. There would be time for tears later, when she was alone, when she could process the magnitude of what was being offered. Maya, voice barely steady. I need to think about... Marcus, take your time, but while you're thinking, know that you saved me tonight. Not just money, my reputation, my legacy, the integrity of everything I've built. A woman I dismissed as invisible saw what no one else could see. He extended his hand, not like an employer offering a position, but like an equal acknowledging another. Marcus, Con TD. I won't make that mistake again. Maya looked at his hand, then at the room around her, the scattered documents, the empty chairs, the Monet hanging serenely on the wall. Hours ago, she had been part of the furniture. Now she was being offered the chance to become something she had stopped believing she could be, herself. Maya. I have conditions. Marcus, a ghost of a smile. I'd expect nothing less. Maya. Full independence for the department. I report to you directly. No intermediaries who might want to bury inconvenient findings. And I want to establish a scholarship fund for students from deaf families pursuing degrees in linguistics and communication. Marcus Dunn. What would you like to call it? Maya thought of her father, of his hands shaping language in the air, teaching her that words were bridges between worlds. She thought of the pendant under her collar, the last piece of him she carried. She thought of all the deaf children growing up right now in houses where no one understood their language, their world, their silence. Her father had given her everything. Now she could give something back. Maya, the David Chen, Fellowship for Silent Voices. Maya nodded, and in that nod was a promise. Maya Chen took his hand. The grip was firm, professional, the handshake of equals meeting for the first time. She thought about how strange it was. This morning she had woken up in her small apartment, checked her bank balance with the familiar knot of anxiety, and prepared for another day of being nobody. Now she stood in a room where a $30 million fraud had just been exposed, shaking hands with one of the most powerful men in finance, agreeing to build something that would honor her father's memory and change her life forever. The invisible woman had become visible, and she would never disappear again.